gentlemen from the cockpit. We've reached our cruise level and we're not anticipating any major delays, so hope to have you at your destination on time as planned. As the cabin crew make their way around the aircraft, please make sure the aisles are clear of it, and I invite you to please sit back, relax and enjoy the flight. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome. My name is MJ Pestridge. Welcome to another P3D video. Today we're going to be talking all about frame rates and all about what happens to your simulator as you descend from cruise altitude down to the airport. And if you suffer from stutters on approach, or stutters as you're literally about to hit the runway, or even, God forbid, crashes of your PC or simulator as you're about to land, this is the video that will help you. Okay. Now, I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but your simulator triggers certain events as you descend down from cruise down to the runway, and depending on what altitude you're at, depends on, you know, what kind of triggers are going to be triggered in your simulator. And it really also depends on what kind of airplane you're flying as well. As you can see, we're in a PMDG 737. We are just about to hit our top of descent. It's a beautiful sort of day. It's not too cloudy. It's okay, pretty much. It's a decent flight here. We're just making the last minute preparations to start the descent down, and straight away, like, my plane is triggering events behind the scenes, you know, that require CPU power or memory power. So from when I was in cruise to already, there is more load on my PC system, you know. My CPU usage will probably go up and increase my memory as I begin descending and triggering these various events. And if you're flying a really hardcore plane like, say, FS Labs or PMDG, then, you know, it's even more intense load as you descend down the various altitudes. So you really have to be prepared for these events, because if you're not, if you're already maxing out your settings because, you know, you could get away with it when you're down on the ground at the other airport, then your PC or your simulator really might start to struggle, and this is where your frame rate will drop or even crash the sim. So I'm going to go through what kind of triggers are happening so you can help to better combat, you know, these issues and these crashes and these FPS drops. So therefore you get a consistent frame rate throughout your flight, and really what you want to try and do is get a consistent frame rate, get a set frame rate. I would recommend 30. You don't really need a 60 FPS. This isn't a video game. And 60 FPS is twice as much as 30 FPS. So, you know, alleviate the issues for your PC and aim for 30, and you can actually then run more within your sim. So, let's talk about the various triggers then as we descend down. Well, what factors are actually in the simulator right now? I mean, we have the plane itself, okay? And obviously the more complex plane, the more triggers internally for that plane simulation are going to take place as you begin to descend down. Like, you know, you're going to put your landing lights on, your throttle is always going to be, you know, moving, the ILS is going to start to align, like in terms of the glide slope. You know, your FMC is constantly doing stuff. The weather outside the window, you're going through the various layers of cloud as well, of atmosphere. So your weather engine is also injecting continually, changing the simulation continually, as is the landscape itself. As you descend down, you know, you're going to suddenly start to see trees and buildings the lower you get, depending on what your level of detail radius is set to in the slider settings. If you have it set to a ultra setting, then you're going to see trees and buildings far out to that distance, pretty close to your plane. So that's a lot of buildings and trees, you know, and in all honesty, at 10,000 feet, you know, you probably can see buildings and trees, but not in great detail, so you don't need the 3D objects loading. If you get mega scenery, you know, it comes with all those buildings and trees included in the texturing for free, you know, and at 10,000 feet plus, it looks realistic. It looks exactly like it does in real life, and therefore until you get down to, like, say 5,000 feet, you don't really need the 3D objects loading into view, you know, because from this altitude, as you can see, I mean, I couldn't see a single tree or a single house out the window, you know, and I mean, right now I am at like 6,000 feet. You know, it's not until I get down a bit lower, 5,000 below, that I'm actually going to start to see the detail of the 3D objects of the houses and trees. So that's unnecessary power that is being taken away from my sim, for my PC, for the memory and the CPU, that I just don't need to use, you know. So save it a little bit, you know, and draw back your level of detail radius. The level of detail radius is basically a bubble around your aircraft. How big or small is that bubble to provide high quality terrain or sim object detail, you know, around your avatar plane? Well, you don't need it going out miles and miles. If you're doing VFR flying, you're going to be flying at, say, like 9,000 feet tops. So therefore, you can have it set to medium and it still looks fine. If you're flying commercially, yes, you're going to see further, but you're not going to see those objects. So again, you could probably set that to high and still get away with it. There's really no need to set it to ultra at all, because you're just putting more strain on your system that is going to be needed as you descend into the runway. So we're turning on final right now, and as we turn on final, again, the weather could be injecting, although I turn my weather engine off at 6,000 feet below. So now there's no weather change. The weather engine isn't actually doing anything, so that's one thing less to worry about as I descend in. Oh, actually, we're not turning on final, sorry. We've still got another 2 turns to do before we hit final. But yeah, as we descend down, there are other triggers for the simulator that is happening in the background. For instance, your entire scenery library is actually loading into the memory. So that way, when you come to up to the airport, it can load the airport or render the airport in view quite quickly, if it's already kind of loaded into the memory. But obviously, you've got to have that memory, you know, to be able to use it effectively in your PC. Same with the GPU. You've got to have a decent GPU, I feel, to run a P3D simulator, because what renders in the world, and I've seen a lot of people like to use a wide viewpoint. The wider your camera view, the more it has to load on your GPU. Now, I personally use chase plane, and I use a zoom level of 1.0, and so that's quite a narrow view compared to 0.5, which is what I see a lot of people use, and that actually expands the view and pushes almost back the captain's head, meaning more information has to be rendered by the GPU. That's putting more strain on your system again. So you can limit that load by sort of zooming in a little bit, which means less is actually in the viewpoint of the camera. Because don't forget, your GPU only renders what actually is visible by your camera. So you turn your camera, that's what's loading or being rendered as you turn your camera. It doesn't sort of load everything in and, you know, it's like it's actually there behind you. You know, you actually have to turn your head for it to render in first. So as you can see now we're starting to descend to the runway. We're on final now, and trees and buildings you can see in the distance are beginning to render in, and this is what is causing slight stuttering of the sim, and it'll be the same. You'll recognize this as you're coming into landing at the runway. Now don't forget, airports have so much going on in them. The more complex the airport, the more load has to take place. So let's say you got the runway to load in, you've got the taxiways, you've got the gates, you've got the actual airport, but you've got the jetways, you've got all the extra flourishes that the airport itself might want to put in terms of, you know, baggage handlers or extra airport vehicles or monorails or birds flying overhead or just like special effects, you know what I mean? All that stuff's got to load in as well. The bigger the airport, the more complex the airport, the bigger the strain on this PC. And it's just like the the simulator of the plane itself. You know, the more complex the airplane, the more strain on the system. So for instance, if you're going to fly into a very heavy complex airport in a very heavy complex aircraft, man, you ain't gonna have much frame rate left if you want high visuals outside your window as well. It's like something's got to give, guys. Do you know what I mean? So if you're flying, if the aircraft is the most important, then fly that aircraft into a moderately sized airport. If you're flying into a very heavy airport and the airport is more important, then fly a moderate sized airplane. You know, fly like a Carenado instead, maybe less complex under the hood, and you'll get a better frame rate. You know, it's like a juggling act. You've really got to manage it correctly. You know, now looking outside the viewpoint here, we can see trees, we can see buildings, everything's now loaded in, and you know, I don't know if you noticed before, but there was a slight stuttery. But you know, there's animations happening on the aircraft, there's animations happening outside, there's just so much going on, you know. So I again turn off my weather engine, I limit it to make sure that it doesn't inject anything under 6,000 feet. I kind of always, whenever I install an airport, I turn off all the special effects, because do you know what, landing the plane is more important than seeing birds circling overhead. It's like you don't need to see those extra flourishes at an airport when you want to land the plane, because landing the plane is the most important thing. It's got to be smooth frame rate. So just turn off all that crap, you know what I mean? And try and limit your resources. Yeah, so for instance, I use mega scenery out the window because it's better, uses less resources. You know, it's just a texture over the mesh and that's it. Whereas if you're loading, you know, Orbex Global Base, Orbex Vector, Orbex Land Class, and then a region, man, you're loading so much data that everything's got to load. So it's like, it is really a juggling act, guys. What is most important to you? The visuals outside your window or the performance of the aircraft on landing? For me, performance of the aircraft on landing. The visuals outside are just very, very little. Now I can see, looking at this preview, because I'm watching this after the fact, and this video came from a stream, and I can actually see stutters. Now, there were stutters in the stream, and that's to do with my internet, nothing to do with my simulator. I don't actually have that many stutters on my stream, and in the next video you'll see that, because I've actually pre-recorded a video rather than streamed it, and you'll see how smooth it actually is. And the pre-recorded videos, you know, will show the true power of my PC, because my streaming PC is got a HD drive, which means, you know, it's slower than an SSD drive, and that's another factor, guys, of stutters coming in for landing. Is your simulator or your PC got a HD drive somewhere in the mix there? Because if it has, then you will get stutters. Now, a lot of my airports sit on a HD drive, so they are coming and loading from HD drive, so there is a slight delay sometimes, or a stutter in their loading, because they're sat on a HD drive. That's just another factor for, you know, low FPS or stutters even without low FPS. I mean, you can actually get like 40 FPS and still have stutters in your sim. You know, the stutters would be the loading off a slow drive rather than the FPS rate dropping. It's quite complex, guys, to be honest, but there are ways you can actually limit or reduce the amount of stutters or low FPS drops when you're coming in on final. For instance, if you do notice an FPS drop, pause your simulator, reduce your slider settings, resume the simulator, and see if it continues to drop, or does that then increase your FPS. If it increases your FPS, save that profile for the changes that you've just made and call it the airport ICAO code. So for instance, this airport here, I believe, is Singapore, so WSSSS would be the name of the airport. Actually, I think this is yeah, this is Singapore, I think. Anyway, oh no, this is Kuala Lumpur. This is Kuala Lumpur. So for me, Kuala Lumpur, I need to actually have a look at it to try and, you know, make it look a little less stuttery if this was actually stuttering from the sim. Obviously this is stuttering from a stream, not the sim. So but yeah, save it as a profile and then use that profile every time you fly to that airport, and you then should have and maintain your correct FPS rate that you want. And that's pretty much it, guys. I mean, seriously, that is the magic secret sauce, is use profiles to maintain your FPS rate. If you get stutters on a final, then lower your scenery details, lower your 3D auto gen, your trees and your buildings, lower your level of detail radius, or lower your mesh detail. Lower it down to 10 meters and you can still actually get away with good looking mesh. You don't need to have 1 meter mesh. Just because your mesh might be 1 meter doesn't mean you have to see it at 1 meter, especially if it's just flat terrain. Like if you're in the outback of Australia, you ain't going to see 1 meter mesh, so lower that right down and you'll never notice the difference. But yeah, lower your sliders basically to increase your FPS rate, save it as a profile, and you're good to go. And that's it really, guys. Thank you so much for watching this. I'm going to shoot off now, and thank you for subscribing to my channel, and I shall see you in the virtual skies, guys. Take care. Bye bye.
Why is everybody screaming? I'm guys. Why is everybody screaming? Minus 272, not too bad.
Got a 466 got disconnected.